Today's episode is brought to you by the Vegas Beer Guys.
Everything sequel contains explicit language. And why the fudge not, you melon farmer?
Hello and welcome to the Everything Sequel Podcast. This is a Requel minisode. My name is Michael Shantz of the How Dare You Awards. Joining me, of course, Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. You can't possibly have a line, can you, Tom?
I got no quotable. I don't know what's going on.
All right.
You blind boxed me.
Yeah, I sprung
I don't
this
know what's
on
happening.
you. All right.
This is what it sounds like when I have not prepared. I just want to prepare everyone for my lack of preparation.
Yeah, as of this recording, we are, I think, 1 week into the release of the latest Scream movie, which I, of course, went and saw. And
yeah, I was matching you premiere for a while, but that streak has ended. I just don't have the time now, sadly.
yeah, you were hitting up Thursday night movies.
Yeah, and Thursday night movies. I really enjoyed it, and I would have happily gone to see the new Scream, which is a franchise that I overall enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just not having that disposable time income.
I hear you
right now.
Yeah, it was weird there for a while where you would say, yeah, you seen this movie yet? You seen the new Halloween yet? I'm like, wait, you saw it already? It hasn't even come out yet. Oh, no, preview night, Thursday.
that brief period
Shit.
where we were living it, a brief period where we went into a parallel universe for about 3 months. And yeah, it was looking back on it, it was very Shantsian behavior. But you have seen it, and
I have,
and it made you think.
So obviously, we're not going to talk about the Scream sequels until we tackle that series. But this sequel in particular brought up an idea because all of those movies have parody within movies themselves. They reference movies themselves, and
they do
talk about the rules of a horror movie and how you can survive a horror movie and such.
And specifically, I suppose the distinction of the Scream franchise is it talks about sequels within its sequels.
Correct.
In a very purposeful way that Gremlins 2, the new batch, but even that is not as metatextually specific.
No, yeah. But what I found interesting was this particular Scream movie makes a lot of hay out of a term they call the requel.
Okay.
Which they are calling half a reboot and half a sequel. Now the only...
I feel like haven't we coined a similar phrase?
I can't remember if we...
I say reboot comes sequel a lot.
Yeah.
Requel is obviously better, but I'm not a experienced screenwriter, so.
So you have characters in this movie, but the only franchises they really have to reference this are the most recent Star Wars movies. And by most recent, I mean the last 3 in the 9-part series. And and the Halloween, the latest incarnation of the Halloween movies. So they're saying that they're half a reboot and half a sequel, and some of the rules that they come up with within this franchise of Scream is what you basically have to do is have new characters and legacy characters coming together to create a new story. But my philosophical brain started getting tickled a little bit by this idea of, is it really half and half, or are they stepping on our turf here? Because aren't they just sequels?
I mean, I think it varies from franchise to franchise. I think you can definitely make the case about the most recent iteration of Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
Don't understand how it applies to the Star Wars sequel trilogy.
Well,
That's just
under the guise
that's
of...
just continuation.
Yes, but...
I mean, Force Awakens, but everyone knows that's because J.J. Abrams is creatively conservative and can't think beyond what he's seen in a movie.
Man, you have it in for J.J. Abrams.
He's wasted enough of my time as a creator of media. Just tired of it. Anyway, I know that's not where you wanted this to go. So, yeah, I'm not.
I mean,
I'm
does
not
does this idea hold water for you? Requel.
Yeah, it does.
Okay,
but I suppose again, it's about it's category versus criteria, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because as a category, you can subjectively apply it to certain movies or series that you've seen. But I don't know if you could get an agreement about what is just a sequel and what is
a reboot,
a requel,
or a reboot. Yeah. I think you could. I think you can separate sequel and reboot. You know, when you think of the 2009 Star Trek, that's a reboot.
Yeah.
Right? That's clear.
But it's a reboot in reboot in continuity. We term that. Mm-hmm. I think.
It's hard to tell at this point, Tom.
Or I'm terming it now. Yeah. It's interesting because one of the requel is catchy, but it's also misleading as a term.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the reason I said I've been clunkily saying reboot come sequel is because requel sounds like it's a remake of the sequel. Which is an entirely different category.
Yeah, definitely.
And that happens all the time. I mean, Die Hard 2, Die Harder is a requel.
It's a remake of the original movie, right?
Yeah, done as a sequel.
Yes.
Done as a... But, I mean... there's the Star Trek reboot, Planet of the Apes, and now Terminator movies specifically use time travel to reboot a series, so you can still claim it's a sequel because it's existing it's in world.
Well, and it's like
it's just that time travel exists in that world and allows us to go back into the past and reset everything.
Because you have it's interesting with Planet of the Apes because you have a remake, Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes, and then you have a reboot.
Well,
with the sort of Caesar trilogy.
The way that Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes ends, and indeed the way that the most recent reboot trilogy go, they leave a place for sequels within the design. Mm-hmm. So in the Marky Mark version of Planet of the Apes, spoiler alert. The spoiler being that this ending to this movie is terrible. He goes back to Earth.
I don't think it's just the ending. That whole movie is a fucking mess. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you feel that way. He goes back to Earth and it's Planet of the Apes. So theoretically, Planet of the Apes could have, we could have had all those movies happen.
Right.
And we see the mission to space going in. I think the first of the most recent Planet of the Apes movies, Rise of, we see Taylor actually going into space at one point on the news. So it's like theoretically this could all exist within the same universe. I guess it comes down to emphasis in the end. Like, what's the emphasis on? Is the emphasis more on continuing the story or resetting to where we were at the beginning? I'd say you have to be pretty much you have to be pretty balanced or tipping away from the idea.
Well, it's just interesting, I guess,
for it to be a valid, because otherwise, why isn't it just like every other sequel?
I just found it interesting that this Scream movie just sort of states emphatically that requel is a thing. When in reality, all all sequels should. I mean, we have different kinds of sequels. We've talked about getting the band back together, but when does a sequel work best? When you just have the band back together, or when you introduce new characters with legacy characters?
I was going to say, if you have a sequel that doesn't introduce new characters, you're in trouble anyway.
Right.
So even
and
if
so
you're
going to be introducing new
you're a
characters
terrible
into your
sequel.
story, and it's still a sequel. So,
unless you're Rocky 2,
yeah, right.
which has 0 new characters, except for a commercial TV director.
And what an asshole!
But let's say that that's the exception to the rule, because the Rocky series doesn't follow any traditional formula that we can understand. Yeah, I just maybe.
So it was this convention that they created for this movie that in its narrative, within its universe, made complete sense,
Yeah, and
because those movies are self-referential towards movies themselves, being movies themselves, all of which to me was fair game. So it works for the movie fine, but is this a term that's going to
explode?
Yeah, is this a term that's going to stick within film study and people who love film? That I'm not quite sure of. Does it belong in our vernacular?
It's interesting in terms of titles as well, because we've had 4 Screams and now we have Scream. So now there are 2 movies called Scream.
And they talk about that specifically in the movie. But no spoilers.
Yeah,
here.
a movie that they don't talk about that in, where they do the same, is Halloween.
Yeah.
There are now 2 Halloweens, and I mean, to me, it's one of the most annoying aspects of that, whatever you want to call it, fad or turn in the industry.
Well, the Halloween series is weird.
Trying to pretend that they're not. It's trying to pretend that they're not sequels and that this hasn't been covered before.
Mm-hmm. And to me, the Halloween series,
what a sequel should do.
The Halloween series were directly created. That first Halloween, the 2018 Halloween.
There's actually 3 Halloweens, isn't there?
Well, that's the thing is. So
once again, I forgot about the existence of Rob Zombie because I like to live in a peaceful world.
Yeah. But that 2018 Halloween was designed as a direct sequel to the original Halloween, and yet they're making but it's a trilogy. They're making 3 of them, but they're forgetting that there's that first movie.
But what you're alluding to here, which is really interesting, is that sequels are like gremlins. They just kind of
in the sense that they're on the airplane wing, and some of us see them and some of us don't.
Oh, I was gonna, technically more like tribbles, but
okay,
there are no tribbles in film sequels, so TV sequels, yes. But you've spoken basically in describing one movie. You've spoken to 4 different categories that movie of sequel.
Right, exactly.
That movie could fit into. So I think what we've found over the years is that that doing this podcast is that your definitions change sometimes even while watching a movie. You start out with one idea of what kind of sequel it is, and by the end of it you have a totally different idea. Sometimes you're never sure.
Right.
And sometimes you can see qualities of a reboot, of a traditional continuation sequel, but but also part of a trilogy. And a direct sequel. Direct sequel seems to be the one there that you could probably say, well, isn't that the trend?
Yeah, right.
That we're speaking to, and we're trying to dress it up and sound more like because I don't know. I mean, we may talk more about direct sequels. I think we're going to do a lot more of them, but it's a category that is all about ignoring the past, which is why I have a hard time with it. They're saying this never happened.
Yeah, right.
Which I feel is essentially dishonest. So I wonder if this is a way to like.
I mean, we just spoke in the Rocky series.
On
Yeah, we just spoke in the Rocky series about Rocky Balboa acknowledging that Rocky 5 exists. That it happened.
It's the
It's
the noble thing to do.
Right. The noble.
So there's something a little bit shifty about the direct sequel. And I think dressing it up as a requel is maybe a way of dealing with that. Sort of like saying, no, we want to reboot the series and whilst continuing it, It's sort of like, so like, but here's I can't ask you this question without you telling me what happens in the latest Scream.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, is it I can't ask you. But okay, I'll ask you as a general question. Is it got anything to do with selective sequel memory? Like, when we did Jaws, we were sort of like, did Jaws 3D happen?
Mm-hmm.
It's like in Jaws: Revenge, has the events of Jaws 3D happen?
I can speak
it's
to
like,
that.
Well, they're choosing not to talk about it, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
All screams have happened.
So how is this a requel? I don't get
well, that's my question to you. That's what I.
Because that's a direct sequel. So what is? My
the
question: what is a
criteria
requel?
they lay out in the movie
is
the biggest criteria they lay out in the movie is that you have new characters with legacy characters.
That's the definition,
essentially. But that feels.
That's every sequel,
right? That exactly.
Except Rocky 2.
So, to me, that's what tickled my bullshit meter, because I thought, well, wait, isn't that every sequel that is good? Like, there are these outliers. Well, Rocky 2, it's an outlier, but it's a good movie. But for the most part,
it's not what sequels normally do, which is that you have a host of new characters, some of which you may convince yourself were in the original movie, but we're not.
I mean, you go to Jaws 2, you get all the kids. You go to Superman 2, I mean, you see them in the beginning of the first movie, but now you're going to get the trilogy of villains in earnest that you don't have in the first movie.
Yeah.
You're always adding
and how are they? Here's a question: how are they defining new characters? Are they saying like basically like a shadow cast?
They might. That's the thing, though. So to me, it feels as though the new cast is taking the center of the story.
Okay,
but that's not true in Halloween, is it? We're still focused on Laurie Strode more than we are anybody else.
Also, who's new in Halloween?
Her daughter, her granddaughter.
But that's just lineage. That's just how sex works, Sex plus time equals children.
Sure.
I mean, again, like, but yeah, and we're not focused enough.
All I know is that they list that Halloween series and 7, 8, 9 of Star Wars as the greatest examples of requelness, and to me, those are all just sequels. So I think I have to call bullshit.
But having talked to you about it now, based on their definition of a requel, I think Star Wars sequel trilogy is now the prime example
of requel.
And then I've come completely full circle. Now I think Halloween isn't, and Star Wars is, because there's a real sense in those movies of passing the torch on, passing the gauntlet to a younger generation.
Because everybody also. All the original characters that we cared about die that aren't droids or furry. All the people die.
Or grumpy old men whose legs don't work because they crashed the plane. Indy 5 coming 2023.
Coming eventually.
You'll believe anything. But now I think, based on their definition, that that makes more sense that the Star Wars, because you're actively eclipsing the cast that were in the original one, and they either die in world or off screen or both.
Yeah, right.
But in Halloween, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's less of an emphasis on pushing the legacy characters out of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even to the point of keeping them in a hospital bed for the entire.
Although in that last movie, as distasteful as it was, for some reason our heroes are the people that would have been storming the fucking Capitol on January 6th. We're following them more than we are Laurie Strode. Again, the big mistake of Halloween 2 is
interesting.
We put her on the sidelines in a hospital bed, and then we're told in this movie we're not going to make that same mistake, and she's in the fucking hospital bed the whole movie.
Don't get me... Well,
you're right.
We have a year.
We got time.
But you might hear that point of view again
in October,
repeated back to you by me in exactly those words. So look forward to that ventriloquist act we're going to do with that movie. Yeah, it's... I mean, is it a little... So one of my favorite... This is not a sequel, sadly, but one of my favorite lines from a movie, and it must be an improvised line, is from A Mighty Wind, the great Christopher Guest mockumentary. They're talking about... That makes me laugh just even thinking about it. They're talking about what they should wear in their revival concert.
Right.
And they say, we can't wear this, it looks retro. And it's like, yeah, but we wore it back then, and it wasn't retro then, it was now-tro. And, that's funny for so many reasons, but one of the reasons is like, sometimes, the awkwardness of that term.
Yes,
covers a multitude of... And that's what, Requel is to me, because it's like, what do you... It's the same paradox. It's the same contradiction of terms. It's like you'd think that if you're doing a rebuild, it can't be a sequel, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're, I guess they're saying that you can continue forward in time, but also reset.
Well, it feels like one of those
things
without
necessarily using time travel.
Doesn't it feel like one of those things that you would say all true reboots are not sequels, but some sequels can be reboots?
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's... I mean... I guess it's about where you draw that line in the sand and say, nah, that's enough. That's enough reboot. It's no longer a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess theoretically,
Spock is in that 2009 Star Trek, but you're never going to call it a sequel because of that.
Well, I would. No, I would.
You think it's more sequel than reboot?
Yeah, because the events of that movie are a continuation of what happens in the Star Trek timeline.
They're not a continuation. We're going back to the beginning.
Yeah, no, because everything that goes on with Romulus and Remus in Nemesis,
mm-hmm.
that leads to what happens with Spock.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, well.
Yeah, Spock goes back, and if you read that, there's even a whole set of prequel comic series where you find out that Picard and LaForge helped Spock go back in time and all that sort of stuff. So, I'll give J.J. Abrams credit. He's sort of like he's found.
You'll do what?
He's found like an in-world way to make a reboot, an in-world sequel idea using time travel that makes... I mean, he stole it from Planet of the Apes. Can't give him too much credit. to make a reboot happen. But then, let's go with that. Are the Planet of the Apes movies, or like Escape from the Planet of the Apes, is that a requel?
See, I think of those
as Conquest a requel?
I think of those as reboot.
Battle... You think of those as reboots?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I think when time travel's involved, it's just sequel.
I guess that's where it makes it tough, is when time travel is involved. But
yeah, time travel's not involved.
I mean, the idea of Star Trek was a reboot. We have an entirely new cast, and the fact that you have Leonard Nimoy in the movie is just sort of a nod, a tip of the hat to the old guard, and hey, don't forget we love you. You know what I mean? It's not like what, to me, maybe it's not always what strictly happens in the movie. It's the intention.
But you can follow it. You can follow it. You can still follow it down the time tunnel.
Yeah.
From the end of Nemesis to the beginning of Star. That's where I think it's sadly a sequel, because obviously the intention is to do a reboot and the outcome is a reboot. But actually, where you put it in the overall timeline, it still counts as a sequel, because without what happened in Nemesis, and I guess all the like Voyager and Deep Space Nine and all that stuff, if that stuff hadn't happened, Spock wouldn't have gone back in time.
All right.
But again, that's where like time travel, it covers.
Yeah, it gets weird when you include time travel.
Yeah, but in the non-time travel verse, I think it's definitely, in answer to your overall question, it's definitely not an established category.
Right.
And I think the movies that we're talking about, you could call a million other things that would be as applicable, if not more applicable, than Requel. But the Star Wars one has won me over.
Okay.
Because of how they define
well,
but I think the way they're defining it
start,
is ludicrous.
Yeah. It makes me start to think.
It's a Scream movie, you know, as well. Like, it's got a... Dumbing down is part of their brand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, going from high to low is kind of part of their brand. So I don't begrudge them these sound bites.
Oh, no, yeah.
Sound like a bit of a soundbite. You know, they've got to communicate with a wider audience.
But it does make me think that at the beginning of every...
people who haven't read Carol Clover's, work on the slasher.
It does make me think that at the beginning of every series, we're going to have to... we'll rank them, we'll declare them good or bad, and we'll declare whether or not they're a remake, a reboot, a requel, or a sequel.
I don't think that's a bad idea, though. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea.
All right.
I think that's... Yeah, I mean... Yeah, I mean... It's interesting. I've always said, and I'm grateful for this too, that we define the sequels we cover on the main show quite narrowly. Mm-hmm. And at some point we're going to have a conversation about this, so maybe this is the beginning of that.
There you go.
Conversation, because it made me, it made me think about Matt Myra's theory about the Daniel Craig Bond films, that they mentioned this before, that after Skyfall, the entirety of the Bond films happen,
mm-hmm.
and then we go into Spectre. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, sometimes it depends on how much you want it to be part of a coherent timeline. Because how the fuck do you do that in Halloween anyway?
Yeah, right.
Like, it was impossible to do before we rebooted it.
Right.
As a direct sequel, after the other direct sequel reboot, and then the reboot.
All right. Well, I'm at least excited that maybe we've come to a conclusion as to how we'll handle it in the future. I think that works for me.
Yeah. We might also want to think about... No, that's fair. Yeah, we can declare what kind of a sequel we think it is. That's good. We talk enough about it, and we make judgments based on what kind of a sequel we think it is and how well it achieves that. So, and that's perfectly legitimate.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, tell us what you think of the Requel debate. We've decided for ourselves. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
Wait, those two statements are contradictory.
What?
Tell us what you think. We've decided for ourselves.
Well,
we've got to do one of the, it's one or the other, isn't it?
We just came to a conclusion. I'm saying that they can tell us what they think.
But you can't. Other people's opinion is irrelevant at this point.
No, we might take it into consideration. We might have another one of these minisodes. You don't know. You might be able to change our minds.
Okay.
Satisfied?
I just think someone's gonna call us out on those two opposing philosophies right next to each other.
Very good then. All right. Send us a message, everyone. Send us an email to everythingsequel@gmail.com. For Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions, Michael Shantz here of the How Dare You Awards. What do you have to say now, Tom?
Nowtro.
Excellent.
That's all I got.
All right, we have a new series coming up soon, everyone. Stay tuned for that.